Hi everybody, welcome back to the cabin. Just in the outdoor kitchen here. Nice warm day outside. A few bugs, actually not too bad. It's bad in the morning, but this time of day is actually not bad. I've actually let the fire go out even around the barbecue that I'm working on right now. Now on my podcast last week, I answered a question that I get more than any other question. I get asked a lot of things, some of them very important things that are helpful, but the one I get the most is how much it actually costs to move off-grid or to do what I've done, like build an off-grid homestead, self-sufficient homestead. And the truth is there's so many variables that really depends on your situation. So I'm going to go through what I think of as the 4 different scenarios, including the ones, all 4 that I've done in my lifetime. I'm 56 this year, and I got my first property when I was 17, built a little cabin, but at 20, that's when I actually built a cabin and moved onto my property to try to live this lifestyle. So that was the cheap version, but I'll get into all of the versions all the way up to now, and I'm going to be fairly specific, even though it's difficult to cover all the variables. I'll talk very specific numbers so you know the range of what you need to in order to start this lifestyle. The other problem with this question is I would say it's the top 3 for sure. I was going to say number 1, but the top 3 for sure reasons that people don't actually take a step in this direction to actually chase this dream, if that's what it is, to actually put it into action. And that's for obvious reasons. It's risky. I mean, it's like starting a business, so it's not for everybody, but you really need to understand a few things. You need to dial in the numbers in order to help you make that decision. And one of the main variables is how much you're actually spending now and what are you willing to give up in order to live this lifestyle. So it's not just about saving enough money to start, it's closing that gap by reducing how much you actually spend, how much you need. I'm going to break this into the 3 and then 4 scenarios depending on where you at and what you're trying to get out of this lifestyle. Sorry, getting distracted by birds. A hummingbird just flew up to the window of the screen and looked in. Okay, scenario number 1 is what I call the minimalist start, and that is what I did the first time when I was 20. So that's going to be the lowest budget, also the most primitive with the least number of comforts and the most work because you're starting off from having very little to begin with. And not only are the startup costs lower, and they were for me back in 1990 when I was 20 years old, the ongoing costs are minimal, much lower than the lifestyle I'm currently living that you're probably living. So in that range, you're probably looking at a small piece of raw land, like somewhere rural in Canada, rural US. Have to buy it obviously very cheaply, which you can, sometimes under $10,000 if you're patient and flexible on location, especially flexible on location. It was my second property. The first property that I actually built and lived on was 5.5 acres, and it had public land on the back side of the property. And then I had deeded access directly across the road, little dirt road, dead-end dirt road, directly across the road. I actually had a nice little beach and a spot to keep my boat, my aluminum fishing boat and a canoe. The very unique property. It was a little development of a bunch of lots that nobody else actually built on. I think there were 17 of us in total, and there was 2 deeded access, but that one was right across the road. Very unique property, but that's what you can find if you're willing to go further outside the busy areas and away from the cities. So that's that's what I suggest. Just look out further and try to find those cheap pieces of land that there's usually going to be some issue with it, why it's that price. A lot of the times it is distance or proximity to major centers. Now you can build a small structure yourself like I did. I built a small stick frame cabin on the island property that I had first, then on that property where I ended up building that log cabin, which was only 8 by 12, so it was very small, 2 bunks, a cook stove, little table, and that's pretty much it. Place to store gear. And I just lived in a tent trailer while I was building that, and in a tent first, then a tent trailer while I was building that. So you can do that. You can build a yurt, convert just a shed, some small thing. You can use hand tools so you don't have a big outlay of money to buying power tools, which of course is going to add to the amount of work, but it's going to cut your costs down. I use a lot of materials from the actual land, and then I got rough cut lumber from a local mill that was nearby, a very, very cheap local rough cut lumber mill. Now your ongoing costs drop dramatically because you own the land outright. You can't get mortgage typically on small land, so you'll have no mortgage, no rent, and property taxes on that type of property are usually really low. If you watch one of my videos about the first thing you should do on a property, figure out the sun orientation before you build a structure, and then make sure you have a spot for the garden so you can grow your own food there. You can hunt, fish, raise some small animals if it's a small piece of property, which it probably will be. Unlikely you'll be able to raise cattle, but certainly pigs, chickens, quail, rabbits, things like that. Now for money in that situation, first of all, it's going to be harder to work online because you're unlikely to have electricity on that property, at least at first, and you're unlikely to have internet, although you could put in a small solar system if you have the money and use Starlink. Otherwise, typically in these small rural communities, everybody's looking for extra hand around their place. Labor, just doing odd jobs. That's where the skills come in later. And also a lot of cottagers or vacationers typically in these rural areas that only visit occasionally, and they need somebody to maintain their property. So the catch is you need skills, or you need to be committed to learning skills as fast as possible. And you need the mental toughness to live with discomfort while you build something better. Not that there's anything wrong with discomfort, of course, it's going to build your character, but if you have family either with you at the time, or if you intend to have family, that you're probably going to be looking at adding comforts over time. But don't be worried about being uncomfortable at first. So scenario 2 is the solid foundation scenario, where you're gonna have to budget between probably $80,000 and $150,000, again, depending where you are, what part of the country or countries. So this is probably the most realistic range for someone who wants a proper start, a bit of land, livable structure from day one, basic off-grid systems in place like septic, even if it's an outhouse, but something there at least existing. And then maybe a small solar off-grid system or a propane power system that's not connected to the grid. Now here's how that roughly breaks down. The land is going to cost you between, let's say, $20,000 to $60,000, depending on location, the acreage, so the size, and the access to water, whether you actually have water or you have water nearby for drinking and or growing food. This is your biggest variable, but also your biggest expense. So places that you could pick up land in this range would be, that I know of, like Ontario, Quebec, parts of the Maritimes, rural Appalachia, the upper Midwest, Alaska. There's affordable land out there if you're not locked into a specific place. Then for the basic structure, you can budget between $15,000 to $40,000 if you're doing most of the work yourself. You're going to spend on the higher end of that range if you're hiring trades for any of it. In my case, not great at electrical. I didn't use an electrician here, but I'd like to get an electrician here actually to shore up the system that I have, just make it a little bit more efficient. So that's a variable for sure. Maybe you need plumbing help or something, or an excavator maybe. Water collection or well, septic or composting toilet. The budget for that is going to be in that like 10 to 20,000 range for a basic functional setup. You can go really high with your you can get really expensive to put in a battery backup system with solar panels. So that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about what I have here, which is pretty basic system for running, lights and power or charging things and so on. On top of that, you're going to need some tools, obviously. This is all, again, assuming if you're starting from scratch. But regardless whether you already have them or not, you're going to need about $5,000 to $15,000, again, depending on what you have and where you're at. So that's first year supplies, tools, and equipment. That leaves you a working homestead, enough runway to grow food, develop skills, and figure out how you're going to generate income from the land or remotely. Like I said, in that case, you probably would get Starlink so you have internet access. Scenario 3 is the full build budget. So this is where you either buy an existing place, or you like a rundown fixer-upper, let's say, or you buy raw land and then build something permitted from scratch. So that full build is going to cost you in the range of, well, 200,000 or up. I mean, you can go up easily into the millions depending on what you're buying. So this is closer to what I've built over time with the house, the homestead that on the 8.5 acres, and then this on the 100 acres. Either one of them you would say they're in that range. Land costs alone are 200,000 plus, and then a lot of building materials. In the case of the house, the 1,400 square foot house that we built on the 8.5 acres, we did need trades there. I need electrician, plumbing, septic, and it's permitted, so I had to get approvals and do things by the book. Or I didn't do any of that here. That's why I built everything, did absolutely every bit of work here myself. So that just keeps adding. Like, start off with, say, 200,000 and up, 200,000 might be just for the property, and then you start building on top of that. Just because you're building with permits doesn't mean you cannot still build cheaply if you're doing most of the labor yourself, especially if you keep the structures a reasonable size. Now, keep in mind, I did not start here. I'm 56, like I said. Even though we had major failures, I was stepping my way up all the way through from the cheap property at the beginning and just kept incrementally getting bigger properties, gaining assets. Went back to zero, but then we still had our house, so that was still an asset that we could leverage to get into the next bigger place. So it's a long-term, I always look at this as a long-term 5, 10, 15-year plan minimum. And then, just be patient and continue to improve and accumulate assets over that time. So this is where the education comes in, because if you handed somebody 200,000 and said, build what Shawn has, you're probably, if you're not experienced, not going to get everything that I have. I've just made a lot of mistakes that I've had to learn from over those 30 years, 35, 40 years, whatever it's been, 35 years, let's say. And that's costly education. So somebody else is going to make the same mistakes, because simple things like if you go just buy a house, unlikely, for example, it's going to be built with sun orientation in mind. Building with the right sun orientation means that you're going to get solar gain when you want it, and no solar coming into the house, solar heat in that case, when you don't want it in the summer. So designing things from scratch is the way to go. And a lot of people don't do that, like I said, so it costs you more over time. And it's very hard to find somebody experienced in building an off-grid homestead, because they're typically contractors that are, I was going to say following rules, but living, just having to go with what the society's looking for generally. So you're looking at something unique when you're trying to build an off-grid homestead or a self-sufficient homestead. Now, with the home prices in the cities, a lot of you that are watching this actually dreaming about living this lifestyle, quitting your job in the city that's stressing you and is unrewarding. This might be the best time to do that. It's to sell your high-priced home in the city and move to the country, which is essentially what we did. We just kept moving more and more rural, more remote, until we ended up having no debt. So we were able to leverage the prior higher value property to get less, to pay less for something more rural, like I said, further north in our case, away from the city. So that's the 3 scenarios. Last one, like I said, might be the most applicable to most of you, or a lot of you at least. I know everybody's all over the map as far as your existing situation. I know a lot of people are probably watching this video because they are broke and they can't buy a house. They've been priced out of the market because of inflation, and that's going to continue to happen. There's a lot of ways I'm going to suggest on this channel and in the on the website, ways to get around that, or ways to still get ahead or live this lifestyle starting off broke. I mean, I mentioned that first scenario, but even that might be too much for a lot of people. But there's a fourth option. It involves more community. I've made a couple of videos, and I think I did a podcast even on it, how we rented land free. We actually got free land next to the little town we were living in. And there's a lot of opportunities like that. Didn't give me the land, but we were able to homestead it, and that property is still being used as kind of a rental, free rental property for part of it. So somebody's maintaining the orchard or the fields there. So anyway, that's an option. But like I said, I'll put links down below here, and you can try to find those videos of the podcast and see what I'm talking about, because it's that was the beginning of my self-reliance, actually, I would say. So it's valuable information maybe for you. So that's the numbers, but let me give you 3 practical steps in order to start implementing this plan. First one is to just run your real number. You really need to figure out exactly what your lifestyle is costing you now, what you're spending your money on, what's discretionary, so what you can cut out and what you're locked into, maybe forever, or for long-term debt that you can maybe get out of various ways. I'll get into that later. So you need to sit down and figure out exactly what your life costs per month. Not a rough guess. Every subscription, every meal out, especially if you want to continue doing that. Everything you pay someone else to do. And most people are shocked by this number, and it's a limiting factor, and they tend to give up once they see what that number is, because it seems overwhelming. But what you do see is how much of it's optional, discretionary, and those are the things to cut out first if you're serious. And I don't know. To me, this is the life. I couldn't be happier with where I'm at, and I think I would encourage everybody to give this a try. So I'm gonna say it's worth it. It's worth cutting out what you don't need to spend money on, whether it's the eating out for lunch or the coffees, whatever it is that you're spending money on that's starting to accumulate. Cutting those out for a few years so that you can live a long and healthy life and happy life, I think is worth it. One of the ways to do it is to tackle the smallest debt first, just so you start getting some wins under your belt. So let's say you have, you know, a $30,000 car payment. You have a $1,500 loan, I don't know, for appliances or a couch or something. I would tackle that small one first and then get it paid off, and then you're just going to reduce the total number of things that you're spending money on, or debt that you're paying off. Then the other option is to go after the highest interest rates, and ironically, a lot of times that is the lower dollar amount. So credit card, for example, maybe your credit card balance is $1,500 or $1,000 or $5,000, and it's also at 20% interest rate. That's the one to tackle first. Pay that down, pay it off, even if it takes you a year, even if it takes extra work, getting a second job, opening a business on the side, some kind of side hustle, something to start paying that debt down is important. Second thing is to actually start a fund, like a savings account specifically for land, specifically for buying that piece of property. So even if you still have that debt that you're paying down, just put some kind of money aside, even if it's $100 a month. That's going to accumulate a little bit at a time. You'll watch that though, and you'll feel like you're doing something. So it's more of a mental win than it is a major financial step, unless you can start putting serious money away. In fact, maybe every time you pay off one of those debts, that is freeing up more money to make a bigger slush fund for the property fund. Now, the third important thing is to start building those skills, which is why I keep sharing all the basic skills on my channels, on all my social media. The gardening is an important one. So like I said, guerrilla gardening, find somewhere to grow something just so you start learning how to do it. You know, spend the weekends maybe getting outside, learn how to use an axe, learn how to use a saw to cut a tree down. Oh, there's so many things that fire management, go learn about solar power and how that works and how batteries work, and maybe take a small engine course. Just start building those skills up. You can do stuff even in an apartment. You can find something to do, and you can go into the woods around wherever you live and start learning about nature. So that's going to be very important to understand. Now, all of this is intimidating, but I always say 10 years from now, you're going to wish you had started not at 56. When I was 30 was a big year for me. When I turned 30, I was actually depressed. I wouldn't say I had a complete mental breakdown, but it really impacted me for a while after turning 30. And I thought that was old, and maybe I hadn't accomplished what I wanted to, or that was I was on the wrong path, which it kind of was. But here I am 26 years later. I'm glad I started doing things to increase my skills in order to take steps in this direction, and finally I'm here. So you're going to age out anyway. You're going to get older anyway, and maybe you live to 90 or 100. So even starting at 50 or 60, 70 is still worth it. So don't let that distract you or discourage you because it looks like it's overwhelming and it's just too expensive and you're never going to pay off your debt. You're never going to be able to afford land. You'd be surprised what opportunities come along when you say yes to everything and you just keep taking steps forward. It's amazing. Before you know it, you're at the top of that mountain. Like, I don't know, just take the steps. You're never going to regret doing that. So if this is one of the first videos you've seen from me, then visit the website, visit the YouTube channels and the social media accounts. Easy maybe to start off at the website, and then you can find your way to all the social media platforms. And I've got hundreds, over 1,000 videos between my 4 channels, 2 that are active now. So there's a lot there to learn, and I'm continuing to put content up, putting up videos and talking about it on my podcast. So if you want to follow along, then like I said, maybe check out the website and find the links there. So that's it. What a life this is. It's worth it. beautiful day. Anyway, but it's hard work. Just to let you know, don't think you're doing this. Get out of so you can live an easier life. I'm working on this barbecue. I need to cut some firewood. I've got. I need to collect some spruce tips so I can dry those for tea for the rest of the year. Oh, what else? Some cleanup. Lots to do. So I'm getting back at it. So thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you back here at the cabin next time. Take care.